The fence along the south pasture had been leaning since August, and I kept telling myself I would fix it. Every morning, I walked past it with my coffee and thought tomorrow. But tomorrow came and went the way it does when you stop caring whether things hold together. The posts were gray and splitting. The wire sagged in places where the cattle used to press against it, back when I still kept cattle. I had sold the herd 14 months after the accident, couldn't manage them alone, and I had stopped asking for help the day I buried Claire and Lily. 3 years. That is how long I had lived on 60 acres of quiet in the Shenandoah foothills without a reason to keep the porch light on past dark. The house still had their things in it, Claire's boots by the back door, Lily's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the edges curling. I ate standing at the kitchen counter most nights because the table had 4 chairs and I could not look at the empty 3. People in town stopped checking on me sometime around the second winter. I did not blame them. Grief makes a man hard to sit with, and I had gotten very good at it. The morning Dale Hardin called, I was standing at the south fence again, not fixing it. His voice was thinner than I remembered. The last time I had heard it, it was shouting my name through smoke and broken glass while he pulled me out of a truck that was already catching fire. That was the night I lost everything. Dale was a stranger who happened to be driving the other direction on Route 33, and he stopped, and he reached into the wreckage, and he dragged me 30 feet across wet asphalt while the cab burned behind us. The paramedics told me later that another 40 seconds, and I would have been with Claire and Lily, instead of standing in a hospital hallway, being told they were gone. I owed Dale Hardin my life, and now he was calling to collect. He told me he was dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, maybe 2 months left, if the doctors were being generous. His voice cracked once, and then steadied the way a man's does when he has already done his crying and is down to business. He had a daughter, Nora, 29 years old, no other family, no savings, and a stack of medical debt from his treatments that would bury her the moment he was gone. He had spent 18 months trying to find a way to leave her safe, and every door had closed. Then he asked me to marry her, not for love, not even for companionship. For the land, the insurance, the legal protections a spouse receives that a daughter standing alone does not. He had already spoken to a lawyer. A marriage would shield her from the creditors coming for his estate. It would give her a roof and a structure and time to find her footing. He said he would not ask if he had anyone else to ask. He said he knew what he was asking. He said he was sorry. I stood at that broken fence and listened to the man who saved my life ask me to save his daughters, and I said yes before I had time to think about what yes would cost. I owed him more than I could ever repay. If this was the price, I would pay it. But then he said something that changed the shape of everything. He said, "She does not know, Emmett, about any of this. She thinks I am leaving her the house and a clean slate. She does not know about the debt, and she does not know about you." I closed my eyes. The October wind pushed through the valley and rattled the fence wire, and I stood there holding a phone that suddenly weighed more than I could carry. Dale died 11 days later. I drove 4 hours to the funeral and sat in the back row of a small church in Dalton, Georgia, and watched a woman I had never met hold herself together in the front pew with her hands folded so tight her knuckles were white. She was tall and thin and wore a dark coat that did not fit right in the shoulders. Her hair was brown and pulled back, and when she turned to speak to the pastor after the service, I saw that her eyes were dry. Not because she was not grieving, because she had decided she would not do it where people could see. I did not introduce myself. I went home. 3 weeks later, Gerald Pratt called. He was the executor of Dale's estate, a lawyer from Dalton with a voice like someone reading terms and conditions out loud. He told me the will had been filed. He told me the conditions were in place. And he told me Nora Hardin would be arriving in the valley within the week to review her father's affairs, still unaware that the inheritance was conditional on a marriage that her father had arranged with a man she had never met. I spent that week cleaning the house for the first time in a year. I moved Claire's boots into the bedroom closet. I took Lily's drawings off the refrigerator and put them in the top drawer of the dresser and turned the lock. I could not throw them away, but I could not let a stranger see them either. Not yet, maybe not ever. Nora arrived on a Thursday. I heard the car before I saw it, a small blue sedan pulling too slowly up the gravel drive like the driver, was not sure she had the right place. She parked near the barn and sat in the car for a long time. I watched from the kitchen window. When she finally stepped out, she was carrying a single bag and wearing the same dark coat from the funeral. She looked at the house, then at the fields, then back at the house. Her expression was not confused. It was the face of someone trying to understand why she had been sent somewhere she did not choose. I walked out to meet her. I said my name, and I told her I was sorry about her father. She shook my hand, and her grip was firm, but her fingers were cold. And she thanked me the way people thank you when they have said it so many times the words have gone hollow. She asked if I had known Dale well. I told her he saved my life once, and that was enough to know a man, completely. She looked at me for a long moment after that, but did not ask what I meant. Gerald Pratt arrived the next morning for the reading of the will. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, and I watched the color leave Nora's face as Gerald read the conditions. The debts were real. The protections Dale had built into the will were real. And the requirement that she marry me within 60 days to activate those protections was real. She stood up from the table. She did not yell. She walked to the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass and stared out at the south pasture for a full minute without speaking. When she turned around, her voice was level and quiet. He never told me any of this. Gerald shifted in his chair. Your father believed it was the only way to protect you from the creditors. My father believed a lot of things. She looked at me then, not with anger, with something worse. Evaluation. She was measuring me the way you measure a room you might have to live in, and you agreed to this. I did. Why? Because he asked, and because he pulled me out of a fire when he did not have to. She held my gaze for another moment, then turned back to the window. The silence lasted long enough for Gerald to clear his throat twice. Then she said, I need a day. I gave her the upstairs bedroom, and I slept on the couch, and I did not ask her anything. The next evening, she came downstairs and sat across from me at the counter where I was eating and said, I will do it. But I need you to understand that I am doing this because I do not have another option, not because I trust you. I told her I understood, and I did. We drove to the courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Ruth Calloway from the neighboring property came as a witness because someone had to, and she wore her church dress and cried the whole time. Even though Nora and I stood 3 feet apart and exchanged vows, like people reading from a manual. Nora wore a blue blouse I had not seen before. She had ironed it, and that small effort hit me somewhere I was not prepared for. The justice of the peace was kind and quick and did not make us pretend it was something it was not. Ruth hugged Nora afterward, and Nora stood very still inside the embrace, her arms at her sides, accepting it without returning it. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. The radio played something I cannot remember. The first weeks were a careful geometry of avoidance. She rose early, and I rose earlier. So by the time she came down, I had already made coffee and left the kitchen. She cleaned things I had not cleaned in years. The windowsills, the baseboards, the shelves in the pantry. She did not ask permission. She just did it. And the house slowly started to smell like soap and lemon oil instead of dust and silence. I caught her one afternoon, standing at the barn door, looking at the empty stalls where the cattle used to come in from weather. She asked me why I had sold them. I told her I could not manage alone. She nodded and said nothing, But the next morning, I found her reading a livestock management book she had picked up from the library in town. She had dog-eared 6 pages. We fell into a rhythm. Mornings were separate. Afternoons, she worked in the garden. She had started along the east side of the house, pulling weeds from soil I had ignored, and I worked on the outbuildings that needed repair. Evenings were the hardest. We ate together because eating apart in the same house felt stranger than eating together in silence. She cooked most nights. Simple things, potatoes and greens and chicken, roasted until the skin cracked, and she served the plates without ceremony. The food was better than anything I had eaten in 3 years, and I did not know how to say that without it sounding like more than I meant. One night she asked me about the scar. On my left forearm, I told her it was from the accident. She waited. Everyone else I had ever told filled the quiet with apologies and questions. She just waited. I was in a wreck 3 years ago, I said. I was the only one who walked away. She set her fork down. Who didn't? My wife and my daughter. The kitchen was very quiet. The clock on the wall ticked 4 times before she spoke. How old was your daughter? 4. She picked up her fork again and looked at her plate. I am sorry, Emmett. That was all. No follow-up questions, no pity face. She gave me exactly the right amount of words, and then she gave me silence, and both of those things were more than anyone had offered me in a very long time. But something in the house changed after that night. She did not look at me the same way, not warmer, exactly, more carefully. Like she was seeing rooms in me she had not known were there, and she was deciding whether to walk through them or leave the doors closed. I noticed her too, the way she hummed when she thought I was not in the house. The way she squared her shoulders before answering the phone, like every call was a fight she had to prepare for. The way she stood in the garden at dusk, with dirt on her hands and her face turned up toward the last of the light, breathing like she was trying to memorize what peace felt like. She was tired in a way that sleep does not fix. I recognized it because I carry the same kind. She found the photograph on a Sunday. I had gone to town for feed, and when I came back, the upstairs hallway closet was open. She was sitting on the floor of the hallway with the dresser drawer pulled out beside her, the lock broken. She had not forced it. The mechanism was old, and the wood had swelled with the season, and the latch had simply given way when she pulled. In her hands, she held the picture of Lily on the porch steps, 3 years old, holding a dandelion with both fists, squinting into the sun and laughing. Nora looked up at me. Her eyes were full. She looks like you, she said. My throat closed. I leaned against the doorframe because my legs were not steady. She did not stand up. She did not put the photo down. She held it gently, like something alive, and she looked at me with an expression that was not pity and was not sadness. It was recognition. She saw the wound in me, and she did not flinch from it. She did not try to fix it. She just sat with it the way you sit with someone in a hospital room when there are no good words left. Her name was Lily, I said. Lily, Nora repeated quietly, like she was giving the name a place in her own memory. I sat down across from her in the hallway. We did not speak for a long time. She set the photo on the floor, between us, face up, and Lily smiled at the ceiling from 3 years and a lifetime ago. When Nora finally stood, she touched my shoulder, just her hand, resting there for a moment. Then she went downstairs, and I heard her start the kettle, and I sat in that hallway and breathed until the tightness in my chest released enough to let me stand. Gerald Pratt came back into our lives at the worst possible time. The first sign was a letter, certified mail, questioning the legitimacy of the marriage. Gerald had filed a formal objection with the probate court, claiming the union was fraudulent, a financial arrangement designed to circumvent Dale's creditors rather than a genuine marriage. The letter was addressed to both of us, and Nora's hands were steady when she read it, but a muscle in her jaw moved the way it does when someone is biting down on anger. The second sign was public. Gerald showed up at the harvest market the following Saturday, the one gathering where the whole valley comes together. He found Nora near the produce tables and said, loud enough for 4 or 5 people to hear, that he had a responsibility to Dale's memory to ensure his estate was not exploited by a sham marriage and a man who saw an opportunity in a dying friend's desperation. Nora did not step back. She set down the basket she was holding and looked Gerald Pratt in the face and said, "My father trusted Emmett enough to ask. That is more trust than he ever put in you." Gerald's mouth opened and closed. Ruth Calloway, standing 2 tables over, put her hand on her hip and stared at him with the kind of expression that communicates more than a speech. But Gerald was not the kind of man who reads a room. He was the kind who reads a brief, and his brief told him he was right. The escalation was steady and deliberate. First, Gerald contacted the bank that held the mortgage reference on the property, suggesting the marriage should be investigated before any spousal protections applied. The bank sent a letter requesting documentation. Then he filed a complaint with the county clerk's office, challenging the marriage license on grounds of coercion, arguing that Nora could not have given informed consent to a union she did not know about until the will was read. It was a sharp argument, and it was not entirely wrong, which made it dangerous. The worst came on a Wednesday evening. I was in the barn replacing a rotted beam when I heard Nora shout from the house. I came through the back door and found Gerald standing in the kitchen with a folder of documents, and Nora standing between him and the hallway, with her back straight and her voice shaking. He had let himself in through the unlocked front door. He was telling her she had legal options to annul the marriage, and that he could represent her interests independently of mine. He was telling her, I had agreed to this arrangement before Dale died, that the whole thing was orchestrated, that she should ask herself what a man with 60 acres and no income stood to gain from marrying a woman with an inheritance. "Get out of my house," Nora said. Gerald looked at her. "This is not your house, Mrs. Hardin. That is precisely the point." I stepped into the kitchen. I did not raise my voice. I told Gerald that he had entered our home without invitation, and that if he did not leave within the next 30 seconds, I would call the sheriff and let the county sort out who was welcome where. He looked at me with the expression of a man who believes his paperwork makes him untouchable. Then he left. But the folder stayed on the table, and Nora would not look at me for the rest of the night. That night, a storm came through the valley. November in the foothills means wind that moves through the trees like something alive, and this one brought rain sideways and took the power out before midnight. I was downstairs checking the generator when I heard the barn door slamming, the one I had not latched because I left in a hurry when Nora shouted. The new beam I had set that afternoon was not braced yet, and if the door kept slamming in the wind, the framing could shift and the whole south wall could come down. I went out in it. The rain was cold enough to feel like gravel on my skin, and the wind was louder than anything I could shout over. I got to the barn and wrestled the door shut and was bracing the beam with a temporary post when the crossbar above me cracked and dropped. I heard it before I felt it. A sound like a rifle shot, then pressure across my shoulders that drove me to my knees. Nora was there. I did not know she had followed me until I felt her hands on my back, pulling the broken timber off me, shouting my name through the rain. She got the weight off and helped me to my feet, and we braced the beam together, her shoulder against the post while I hammered the support into place. Her hair was soaked flat against her face, and her hands were bleeding where the wood had torn the skin, and she did not stop until the wall was stable. We made it back to the house and stood in the dark kitchen, both of us dripping, both of us breathing hard. She was shaking. I was shaking. She looked at my shoulder where the timber had hit, and her fingers moved toward it and stopped. "Let me see," she said. I pulled my shirt collar aside. The bruise was already spreading, dark against the skin. She touched the edge of it gently, and her hand was cold and wet, and I felt it all the way through me. "You came out in that storm for a barn door," she said. "I came out for the barn. You came out for me." She looked up at me. The rain was still hammering the roof. The power was still out. Her face was inches from mine, lit by nothing except the faint gray of the storm through the windows. I kissed her. It was rough and graceless and tasted like rain and cold and everything I had been refusing to feel. She kissed me back. Her hands gripped the front of my wet shirt, and she pulled me closer, not gently, and I held her, and the storm roared around the house, and neither of us let go. Afterward, we sat on the kitchen floor with our backs against the cabinets and a blanket around both of us, and neither of us pretended that what had just happened was part of any arrangement. "I did not marry you because of the will," she said quietly. "I thought I did. But I stayed because of the way you looked at me the night I asked about your scar, like you were terrified of being seen, but you let me see anyway." I looked at her. "I do not know when this started. Maybe the morning you cooked for me and did not make conversation because you understood I did not need words. Maybe the day in the hallway when you held Lily's picture and said her name like it mattered to you." She leaned into me. "It does matter to me. I know. That is why I am telling you something I have not said in 3 years. I paused. The rain was quieter now. I am not alone anymore, and I do not want to be again. She did not answer with words. She laced her fingers through mine and rested her head against my shoulder, and that was enough. It was more than enough. Gerald Pratt made his final move 2 weeks later. He filed a formal petition with the probate court to void the marriage and seize the estate protections. And he brought a forensic accountant's report alleging financial irregularities in Dale's final transactions. He was thorough. He was relentless, and he overplayed his hand because the forensic report contained fabricated entries. Gerald had doctored 2 line items to make it appear that I had received payments from Dale before the marriage, suggesting a quid pro quo. What Gerald did not know was that Ruth Calloway's nephew worked at the county clerk's office and had seen the original filings, which showed no such payments. Ruth told her nephew told the judge's clerk, and the judge requested the original bank records, which contradicted Gerald's report on every point. The hearing was on a Tuesday. Nora and I sat together. Ruth sat behind us. 2 other neighbors I barely knew came and sat in the gallery without being asked. Gerald presented his case with the confidence of a man who has never been wrong in a room full of paper. The judge listened. Then the judge asked Gerald to explain the discrepancy between his forensic report and the bank's original records. Gerald's face went the color of old milk. The petition was denied. The marriage was affirmed. The estate protections held. But the part I remember most is not the ruling. It is what happened after. Gerald stood in the courthouse hallway, his briefcase hanging from one hand, and Nora walked past him. She stopped. She did not raise her voice. "My father spent his last months worrying about me," she said. "He trusted you to help, and you used his estate to build a case against the one thing he asked for. I hope the billable hours were worth it." Gerald opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I saw something pass across his face that I did not expect. It looked like shame, but older than that. It looked like a man who had spent 30 years defining himself by winning, and had just realized that winning and being right are not always the same thing. He picked up his briefcase and walked out of the courthouse, and I never saw him in the valley again. People stopped talking about him within the month. That is how it works in a small place. You do not get punished. You get forgotten. Winter settled over the valley the week after the hearing, and for the first time in 3 years, I did not dread it. Nora fixed the south fence. She did not tell me she was going to. I came out one morning with my coffee and found her setting the last post, her breath fogging in the cold, her hands red from the work. The wire was tight. The posts were straight. She had done it better than I would have. I stood there watching her, and I thought about the morning Dale called, and how I had said yes because I owed a debt, and how the debt had turned into something I did not have a word for yet, something larger than obligation, larger than gratitude, something that filled the rooms I had emptied and lit the porch I had left dark and put a voice back into a house that had been silent for 3 years. We brought cattle back in the spring. 6 heifers and a bull from a ranch, 2 valleys over. Nora handled the purchase. She had finished the livestock management book and 2 more after it, and she negotiated the price with the same quiet certainty she brought to everything. The first morning the herd moved through the south gate and into the pasture, she stood next to me and watched them settle into the grass, and she smiled. Not the polite smile she used in town, a real one. The kind that reaches the eyes and stays. Ruth came by on an evening in May with a strawberry pie and a look on her face like she had something to say. She set the pie on the counter and looked at Nora, then at me, then back at Nora. Dale would be proud, she said. Both of you. Nora's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She nodded once, and Ruth nodded back, and that was the whole conversation. I found the photograph of Lily on the nightstand one evening, not hidden, not tucked away, just sitting there next to the lamp, face up, where I could see it when I woke. Nora had placed it there. She had not asked. She had not announced it. She had simply decided that Lily belonged in the room where we slept, in the life we were building, not locked in a drawer with the things I was afraid to look at. I picked it up. Lily squinted back at me from the porch steps, clutching her dandelion, 3 years old, laughing into the sun. I ran my thumb across the glass. Nora came in and stood beside me and looked at the picture. I want her on the wall, she said. Mo? Downstairs, where everyone can see her. My throat was thick, but I managed it. She would have liked you. I would have liked her. Nora took my hand, and I want our children to know her name. I set the photograph down. The porch light was on. Through the window, I could see the south pasture. The fence standing straight. The cattle settled in the grass under a sky that was going amber at the edges the way it does in May, when the days run long. 3 years ago, I stood in this house with nothing but quiet and guilt, and a life I did not know how to live. Now, the kitchen smelled like bread. The hallway closet was open. And the woman who came here expecting to sort through an estate had sorted through me instead. And what she found was worth keeping. The last thing I did that night was walk out to the porch. The light was warm above the door. The valley was dark and still. Somewhere in the pasture, one of the heifers called out low and steady, and another answered. I stood there and listened to the world I had almost let go of, and I understood, finally, that Dale Hardin did not save my life once. He saved it twice.